The views and opinions expressed in the following program are not necessarily those of Open Sky Radio. Please be advised.
Good day, everybody. Welcome to The Fire You Can't Put Out. I want to welcome you to episode 41 of this little show, which has been going on now for almost a full year. We celebrate our 1-year birthday next month. I'll be making a big fat deal out of that, so I want to thank everybody for their support. Of course, this show started off as a group effort, and it still is, even though not all of us are still on the air. We still all are very much involved in the show and are still very interested in where it's going to head. Now, episode 41, with 52 weeks in a year, we should be pretty close to episode 52 with our birthday coming up here in about 7 or 8 weeks. Obviously, we won't hit that number. There were a couple of shows that we had to skip earlier this year when we were having some growing pains, but of course those have all gone by the wayside now, and we have not missed a single episode now that there's one voice on the air. It was always, whenever we all try to get in the room at the same time, of course it's easier for one guy to flip on a mic and just go than it is to get all three people in the same place at the same time. But Angela is still a part of our team. Kevin is still very much a part of our team. And I want to say thank you because I have an awful lot of fun doing this. I want to start with this, a story about the Copper Kings. Now, I've been working on today's show actually for a couple of weeks now. I have not gotten to do science in a while, so science will be done on this episode, a big chunk of science. I have not gotten to food inequality, which I'm going to get to, income inequality, which I'm going to get to, and then there's going to be a portion of the show where science and inequality may or may not intersect. So let's start here. The story of William A. Clark goes like this. He was one of Montana's so-called Copper Kings of the 1800s. After making millions in a booming mining industry and trying his hand in the electric, newspaper, banking, and railroad industries, Clark set his sights on political office. In 1899, Clark made a serious push to become a U.S. Senator from Montana. Now, what you may not realize is back then, U.S. senators were chosen by their respective state legislators. There weren't direct elections of senators. They were voted on by other legislators. So one afternoon, Clark walked into the Montana state legislature and announced that he would be standing in the back of the room, holding envelopes filled with $1,000 bills. And he said he would give those envelopes to anyone who voted for him. Enough legislators voted for him and took his money. The Montana sent him to Washington, D.C. as their senator for the 1900 legislative session. But Clark's bribery scheme was so public and brazen that even the largely corrupt U.S. Senate was horrified. They refused to seat him after reading newspaper stories about his passing out of $1,000 bills to get elected. And it was the notoriety of Clark's naked bribery attempt in Montana, well reported in newspapers across the country at that time, that helped lead to the passage of the 17th Amendment, which says that U.S. senators are to be elected by the people and not state legislators. With all this notoriety, Clark quickly became public enemy number one in the 1900s. Now, this comes from a story you can find over at truthout.org, and the point that they're making is about the Koch brothers, which we covered in a good chunk of last week's show, saying that the Koch brothers are going to become the new Copper Kings because they've given $196 million to Americans for Prosperity, Freedom Works, and other groups that have given money to the Tea Party movement. And quite honestly, the Tea Party movement is about, if nothing else, the Tea Party movement is about helping billionaires. That's it. And it seems that everything the Tea Party wants also happens to be exactly what the Koch brothers want. Okay? And as we mentioned, if the Keystone XL pipeline gets built, it will more than double the net worth of the Koch brothers. But I want to take this story about the Copper Kings in a different direction, because I see what's happening with politics right now. And I've made this point before, that no matter who we send to Washington, the minute they get there, there's going to be 100 lobbyists banging on their door, wanting to take them out to lunch, wanting to buy them stuff, wanting to donate to their campaign coffers in order to get, obviously, what they want. When Citizens United was passed by the Supreme Court, or upheld by the Supreme Court, or decided on, however you want to say it, when Citizens United said that you could give as much money as you wanted to a candidate, but you could not give it directly to them, well, the last couple of elections have been barn burners with respect to the amount of money that people have spent on those elections. In order to get, well, if you give a lot of money to a politician, obviously you're going to want that politician to work for you. But there is one guy who is unhappy with politics, the state of politics, the state of the way that we give to politicians. He's so unhappy with it that he has decided to take his case to the Supreme Court as well. But he's not unhappy in the way you would think that he's unhappy. Ladies and gentlemen, meet Sean McCutcheon, who went in front of the Supreme Court along with the RNC, that's right, the Republican National Committee, to say, you know what? The limit on the amount of money that they can give to politicians is too small, and that nobody should get to tell him what he can do with his money. He should be able to give as much money as he wants to whomever he wants. Now, the case is called McCutcheon v. FEC. McCutcheon is an Alabama businessman. He's the lead plaintiff, even though he is in this case with the RNC, and he's challenging specifically the $123,200 limit, okay, $123,200 limit on contributions a single donor can make to federal candidates and political party committees during any 2-year election cycle, okay? If McCutcheon prevails, he and similarly wealthy donors will soon be able to write campaign checks for up to $3.6 million a pop. McCutcheon's not shy about his motives either, so here's the thing. He's unhappy that he can only give $123,000 right now and wants it to be raised to $3.6 million, which I can't even tell you how many times I have been at the dinner table with my family thinking about who to give money to, and I said, my God, why am I only able to give $123,000 to one candidate? I really, really, really wish I could give $3.6 million. Okay? So obviously, Sean is doing this because he cares about the rest of us. What are going to be the implications of this? I think it's pretty obvious. If he gives that much to a candidate, and then you, the voter, turn out to vote for that candidate and put him in office, who thinks that that candidate is going to work for you? Sean McCutcheon just cut him a $3.6 million check. In my opinion, this case is going to be decided in Sean's favor, unfortunately. But back to the Copper Kings thing, I think it's going to be such naked bribery that it will finally horrify the American people enough to where they will stand up and say enough. Right? I've made the case for some time that we should just do it now, but I think once this case gets decided and the amount that's spent on elections goes even higher, I think the American people will say enough to all the money and enough to the Tea Party. And speaking of enough with the Tea Party, and obviously these are all going to tie together. I see what McCutcheon's doing, what the Koch brothers are doing, what the Tea Party's doing, as quite honestly one and the same. And I think that eventually it will all go by the wayside. There's going to be some rough roads ahead, obviously, but I think eventually it's all going to go by the wayside. So, last week, Alan Greyson stood up and compared the Tea Party to the KKK, okay? And here's the case he made. He says there's overwhelming evidence that the Tea Party is the home of bigotry and discrimination in America today. Just as the KKK was for an earlier generation, he said in a statement provided to HuffPo, if the hood fits, wear it. And I quote, regarding the image that the campaign circulated, the Tea Party has engaged in relentlessly racist attacks against our African-American president. For example, when the president visited my home in Orlando, my home city, as it were, back to the article, Tea Party protesters shouted, Kenyan go home. Other examples included Tea Party chants of bye-bye Blackbird and Tea Party protesters saying Obama's plan, white slavery, and Imam Obama wants to ban pork, and the zoo has an African lion, the White House has a lion African. As well as this repulsive one, it was a picture depicting the President of the United States as an African witch doctor with bananas in his hair. Now, it goes on, okay? And it mentions the repeated use of the N-word, how they've responded or how they've called Hispanics wetbacks. Grayson's comparison, though, is really not all that novel, because Professors Matt Barreto and Christopher Parker, in their book Tea Party, Change They Can't Believe In, published by Princeton University Press, made a similar case, drawing connections between the Tea Party and right-wing reactionary movements of the past, including the Know Nothing Party, the Klan of the 1920s, and the John Birch Society. So, is the Tea Party racist? Well, why don't we ask some actual racists? HuffPo spoke with Pastor Thomas Robb, National Director of the Knights of the KKK. He said it's very difficult to say how we, the racists, compare with the Tea Party, okay? Stormfront.org, which is another right wing, which is another white supremacist site, and whose motto is White Pride Worldwide, is among the most popular white nationalists, and discussion of the Tea Party is a regular part of the chatter. One thread, started in 2011 and still active recently, debates just how racist the Tea Party is. In the evil upside-down world of white supremacy, the label of racist is meant as a compliment, and to many Stormfront posters, the Tea Party earns high remarks. The debate breaks down into roughly two camps, one arguing that the Tea Party is a dead end for white nationalists, and the other arguing that many in the Tea Party already have racist attitudes and present an opportunity for white nationalists to ply their message. Okay? Many of the racists participating in the Stormfront discussion say that they themselves are either Tea Party members or have attended multiple Tea Party meetings. But to be sure, the Tea Party has quite literally millions and millions of supporters, and many of those people are not remotely racist, as the racists on Stormfront readily lament, and even examples of racist language and signage at Tea Party rallies pales in comparison to the domestic terrorism carried out by the KKK. Cross-burnings, beatings, lynchings, bombings, murder. In the Stormfront conversations, many neo-Nazis rushed to the Tea Party's defense when other white nationalists accused its members of being insufficiently racist. Stormfront poster S.S. Vicious argued that Tea Partiers should not be written off because many are knee-jerk racist toward darker-skinned people, but are not sophisticated enough in their racial analysis to be sufficiently anti-Semitic. However, he makes the case that it's a start. Obviously, the Tea Party vehemently disagrees, argues that they're not racist, says they simply hate Obama's policies, but dig this. The president enforces the laws, the legislator writes the laws, and then the Supreme Court interprets the laws. Ask a teabagger. Next time you get a chance to talk to one, they say, I'm not racist, I just hate his policies. Fine. Make them name a specific policy that they don't like that he has implemented all by himself. Understanding the rules of government and the way government works, there's a real good chance that they're going to come up completely empty-handed. So, let's get to the polls governing these people. 64% of Americans view the Republican Party unfavorably. 56% view the Tea Party unfavorably. These are gigantic numbers. Both are all-time highs in CNN's pollings, although in each case it's only a 2-point increase from a survey taken September 27th through the 29th. Prominent Republicans have also taken a hit. John Boehner from Ohio, his unfavorable rating is at 55%, up from 48% just before the shutdown. Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell's unfavorables rose to 42% from 39% before the shutdown. Members of their own party are also increasingly rating them negatively. This is a fight within the party. Senator Ted Cruz of Texas, one of the most vocal supporters of the shutdown, saw his unfavorable rating climb 6 points to 42%. Okay, now of course, the Budget Committee is happening right now, and there's a lot of talk going on right now. And I heard Bernie Sanders talking about this earlier, and he says, you know what, finally the Republicans, they're at the table, they're talking, and they're really, really worried about another government shutdown, because their party has taken such a gigantic hit, and they've only really got the next year to make it up. And if the Democrats hit them hard enough during the election cycle, through radio ads, television ads, with their already tanked numbers, there's a pretty good chance that they won't be able to recover enough at all. We're looking at another shutdown in January or February. I forget which is which, because they raised the debt level, or the debt limit to 1. Anyway, they've got just the beginning of next year, and they've got to get things figured out by then. And so the Republicans might have to concede on a few things because, next year is an election year. And if the president is standing up and saying, we want the government back open right now, keep it going, and the teabaggers say, well, we can't have it open because, Obamacare, then they're going to lose, and they're going to lose hard. Another poll. This is the final blow. This comes to us from Dante Atkins over at Daily Kos. Americans think Republicans don't care about them. Over half the country now thinks that it's a bad thing that the Republican Party controls the House. 3/4 of Americans believe that the Republican members of Congress don't deserve reelection. And of all those numbers, although those numbers are bad in their own right, there's also one that's even worse, as Steve Bannon of MSNBC reports. The results cover quite a bit of ground, but there was one question in particular that stood out. Respondents were asked whether they believe the various officials in Washington are more interested in doing what's best for the country or what's best for themselves politically. It's an interesting question because it speaks to something that isn't often polled, which is perceptions of motivations. Dante Atkins put together a chart over at dailycoast.com, and you can see it over there, to capture the results, which should terrify Republican officials. By a nearly 4-to-1 margin, Americans believe GOP lawmakers and Congress aren't concerned with the nation's best interests. Okay? But what should scare Republicans even more is their own abysmal numbers. Anyway, better than their own numbers are President Obama's, despite every single thing the Republicans have said and done to delegitimize the president. They've ascribed evil intentions to him and impute that he does not share American values. A majority of Americans think that he cares about what's best for the country. Okay, despite these drastically horrible numbers, some of the Tea Party faction, though, are still very, very excited. Take note of this. Very, very excited about another government shutdown. They're already talking about the next time that they're going to shut the government down. Now, here is a section that I've been working on for some time. And I'm excited on the one hand to bring it to you because I've been compiling this information for a while. But then on the other hand, obviously bad news. Today we are taping this show on November 1st. And as of today, $5 billion is being cut out of the SNAP program. Nearly 48 million Americans, including 22 million children, will begin to see their food assistance benefits cut today as a temporary boost to the SNAP program. That's the Supplemental Nutritional Assistance Program, is ending. Okay, this is the food stamp program. This is what takes care of food insecurity. The 2009 Recovery Act provided a small increase in SNAP benefits. Okay, the coming benefit cut will reduce SNAP benefits, which are already modest, for all households, by 7% on average, or about $9 per person per month. Without the Recovery Act's boost, SNAP benefits in the fiscal year 2014 will average less than $1.40 per person per meal. Okay, SNAP is one of the most powerful anti-hunger tools that we have, helping millions of low-income working families, children, seniors, or people who are struggling to find work, and even veterans enough to eat. Several recent studies have confirmed that SNAP benefits dramatically reduce food insecurity, which nearly 1 of every 7 households faced at some point last year. 1 of every 7, okay? SNAP helped to keep nearly 4.7 million Americans out of poverty in 2011, including 2.1 million children, and has been a stepping stone for Americans while they look for work and while they try to get back on their feet. Now, there's a bill being debated right now with the upcoming budget talks, okay? And the bill that they're talking about in the Senate would cut SNAP by another $4 billion over 10 years. The House bill, though, would cut SNAP by $40 billion, 10 times as much, okay? Why? Right? Well, it's coming largely, obviously, or almost exclusively, I should say. We'll get into some of those numbers later here. From the Republicans, they're saying, well, these people are sitting around and they're just collecting checks and they're living high on the hog and they're driving around in their Cadillacs and blah, 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 blah. The same thing that they've been preaching ever since Reagan was president. But it's not true. Reform, welfare reform as it were, began in the mid-90s, and I think that this was one of the things that Clinton was trying to prove himself to not be such a left-winger. You know, I'm not such a left-winger, and then he worked with Newt Gingrich on reforming welfare, and they called it ending welfare as we know it. What we know now, all these years, so what was it, 96, and we are in 2013 now, so we're looking at, 17 years after reform began, we get this report from MotherJones.com. Welfare reform is leaving more people in deep poverty. I don't think a lot of people realize that as much as you may not like the welfare program, it keeps people in homes, it keeps food in their stomach, and it is a good economic stimulus program, which you can't say about war, because certainly you're employing people when you're initially building bombs and whatever, but there's not as much of a multiplier effect. With food stamps, welfare, these things get spent and spent again and spent again and spent again. The multiplier effect, the way the money, this is economics. With war, you build that bomb, and sure, somebody was paid to build that bomb. Then you drop the bomb, you kill a ton of people. Not only are you not making any more money, you're now costing the country money because it's killing. Killing leads to more killing, and now we're paying for all of our veterans to have, this lifelong care for these terrible injuries that they suffered. So, back to this. Welfare reform is leaving more in deep poverty. In a new report from the Center on Budget and Policy Priorities, that's the CBPP, that looked at cash benefits provided under the Temporary Assistance for Needy Families, that's TNAF, commonly known as welfare. It finds that the value of monthly cash benefits that make up the fragile safety net for the poorest families with children has continued to decline steadily since the program was reformed. I'm making air quotes with my fingers, although you cannot see them, in 1996. I heard an ad on a conservative talk radio show today, put on by Newsmax. I mean, not the show. It was an ad during the conservative talk show by Newsmax, and it's advertising for a website called ssfree.com. Don't go there. It's probably going to give your computer a virus. But what they did mention was they said, your benefits as a retiree are going down because of Obama, but welfare payments have gone up 30% for those welfare bums because of Obama, which, by the way, is an absolute lie, okay? According to the CBPP, there is not a state in the country whose welfare benefits are enough to lift a poor single mother with 2 kids above 50% of the poverty line, or about $9,700 a year. In many southern states, TNAF doesn't provide enough money to get a poor family much above the 10% of the poverty line. What's especially troubling about these figures is that, as the CBPP reports, TNAF benefits are often the only form of cash assistance poor families receive. They may be getting food stamps, which definitely help their situations, but you can't buy diapers or pay the rent with food stamps. Okay? People like Clinton and Newt Gingrich claimed that they were going to get these people out to work, with the welfare to work program, and obviously this is cutting their benefits is not the way to do it. It's tough to operate when you're hungry. We've got another study on that, and we'll get to it. We'll get to it here in just a minute. But not surprisingly, since 1996, the number of families with children living in extreme poverty, that is on less than $2 a day or less, has shot up 130%. I want to throw this in here real quick. Paul LePage, this is the return of the 47%. You remember that? The whole comment that Romney made during the election? 47%. Paul LePage claims 40% of able-bodied Maine residents don't work. Maine Governor Paul LePage, Republican obviously, said that 40% of able-bodied Maine residents do not work, according to a recording of his remarks obtained by Bangor Daily News blogger Mike Tipping. Tipping, who's also the communications director of the Maine's People Alliance, provided the HuffPo with a more complete recording of Paul LePage's remarks, okay? And Paul LePage is saying 1 in 3 are collecting welfare in Maine. And then he went on. Oh boy, nothing like attacking the poor. Here's the thing, we're spending an awful lot of money on an awful lot of things we don't need. Let me say it, war. In case you haven't noticed, I don't care for war. Okay, but we're also spending it on fighting people who are smoking marijuana. That's another gigantic waste of money. And these things aren't beneficial to society. Okay, now this study from therealnews.com, it points out that food stamps are among the most effective economic stimulus. Okay, now there's an awful lot of myths about welfare though. And that has helped turn mostly people on the right against wanting their brothers and sisters, their American brothers and sisters, to be fed. Okay, myth number 1 is that SNAP recipients don't work. If you look at food stamp recipients, more than 3/4 of the household receiving SNAP benefits have at least one child, elderly and or disabled person living there. Unemployed childless adults who do not have disabilities are limited to 3 months of SNAP benefits every 3 years in most parts of the country. But due to high unemployment, this requirement has been waived in most states. Myth number 2, SNAP is riddled with waste, fraud, and abuse. Abuse happens in about 10% of businesses that accept food stamps. But what's really important here, where fraud happens or how often. By the USDA count, only 3% of all SNAP benefits represented overpayments, meaning that they either went to ineligible households or went to eligible households, but in excessive amounts. USDA says it has a zero-tolerance policy on fraud and has come out with additional methods to fight abuse. But in the grand scheme of things, SNAP actually has one of the lowest rates of fraud in any federal program. I've had this happen in my family. I moved out of my mother's house when I was 16 or 17, and she continued trying to claim me on her welfare benefits. And when she was found out, she was kicked off the program, blacklisted for life. So yeah, the laws about this are real. You will not commit fraud with this program, and if you do, you will pay. Myth number 3, SNAP creates dependency. SNAP was created to be a temporary system, and for the most part it has been, with the average participant staying on SNAP between 8 and 10 months. But those on the program are barely making it with $4.50 a day to spend on food, which comes out to about $1.50 per meal. But it does seem to make a difference. A Census Bureau released Tuesday found that food stamps have helped lift 4 million people above the poverty line and have kept tens of millions from becoming poorer. Part of the problem that we're looking at here is that even people that work, wages have stayed stagnant since, essentially since Ronald Reagan became president. You catch that? Yeah. They've stayed flat or they've dropped. And more people are having to go on these assistance programs because the jobs aren't paying enough. Now, Paul Ryan would have you believe that if you give a tax break to a millionaire, right? If you give a millionaire more money, that millionaire will go out and do some work and put more people to work and put more money into the economy. But with their argument that it creates dependency, they believe that if you give a poor person money, he will not work. Think about that backwards logic. Because it's really quite the opposite. You give a millionaire a bunch of money, he's already got a ton of money. What's he going to do? He's going to throw it on the pile, or he's going to put it in a Swiss bank account, or whatever. What's going to happen if you feed a hungry person? That person will be able to be active. That person will be able to go out and find a job, no matter how little it pays. But then when they find a job, yeah, because of the way wages have been, because of our trade policies and all the rest, we've seen so few jobs in America that pay well. Call me a protectionist, but I think we should bring those jobs home and only buy American. Okay? Unless it's absolutely something that we cannot grow here, or absolutely something that we cannot make here. Like our cell phones are probably still going to be made overseas because they contain so many rare earth materials. Fine. Great. But if we say, well, they're being made in China because it's much cheaper to make them there, yeah, you pay somebody there 10 cents an hour, and we're asking you to pay minimum wage here, yeah, I can see why it's cheaper there. Because you're exporting slavery. This report from pjmedia.com. On October 18th, the Southern Education Foundation released a report based on 2011 data titled A New Majority, Low-Income Students in the South and the Nation. The key finding is that low-income children now comprise a majority of students in the public schools of 17 states across the nation, and 13 of those states are in the South. And the fact that 48% of school children qualified as low-income nationally. 48% of our children qualify as low-income. So does this 48% mean that the USA is an emerging third world nation? Because that's really what it sounds like. Maybe. But before that question is definitely answered, it is important to acknowledge that the numbers used in the SEF study to determine a child's low income status were based solely on the number of students receiving either free or reduced school lunches. Looking at the chart over on pjmedia.com leads one to conclude that even if slightly less than 48% of our nation's children are living at or near poverty levels, that our nation's future is still tragically at risk. This is especially true when the chances of an American child escaping poverty through work and education seem to be less than at any time that it ever has been in the past. Okay? And being poor is not just bad for your economic situation, your living situation, your tummy. It's also very, very bad for your brain and your life expectancy. I told you this was going to be a huge section. I'm going to let me real quick. I grew up dirt poor. I grew up very hungry. I had a miserable childhood. And just about every day of my young life, this is terrible to say, I wished, because I found out that my mom and dad were very, very young when my mom became pregnant with me, and I wished every day of my young life, because my mom said, well, we were considering abortion, and just about every day of my young life, I said, my God, Mom, why didn't you abort me? Yeah, it sounds terrible. A little tear-jerking, actually, to even mention it now. My life has gotten vastly better since I've gotten older. I have built a life. I've gotten a good job. I've lifted myself out of that. When we first had our children, yeah, we were on food assistance for a little while. It was helpful. A hand up, as they say. And I've done very well. I own a couple of homes. I'm married to a beautiful woman, and I've got children now. So I look back on a statement like that, on a dark statement like that, and I don't necessarily regret saying it, but I'm so glad that I'm not there, and my children will never have to be there. Well, at least not while they're living under my roof. Okay, Okay, now this comes. This is a recently completed study. And it says that growing up in poverty changes a person's brain in long-lasting ways that harm emotional processing and increase a child's odds of mental health problems, according to a new study by scientists at the University of Denver. Okay, the study tested adult subjects' emotional responses to negative images. The half of the study group who grew up poor were less able than other participants to minimize their emotional reactions to negative images, according to Bloomberg. That reduced emotional processing ability carries serious consequences, according to lead author Pil-Young Kim of the University of Denver. Family and Child Neuroscience Lab, she says, living in poverty at a young age can cause long-lasting changes in brain development, which contribute to difficulties in regulating of emotions and future devastating health outcomes, including mental illness and high mortality and morbidity in adulthood. While the study examined that growing up poor, what growing up poor does to a person over decades, other research released over the summer zeroed in on the near-term consequences of poverty on adult brains. The stress of poverty has the same effect on a person's cognitive ability as, dig this, pulling an all-nighter every night, knocking as much as 13% off of a person's IQ. These studies add to the evidence that economic hardship has direct negative consequences on people that cannot be easily shrugged off through simply trying harder. Children's cognitive ability is also undermined by the experience of poverty, which a 2009 study found hurts the development of the working memory that is key to everyday mental tasks. Poverty is more closely linked to mental illness than exposure to warfare, according to a study published earlier this year. Even those students whose mental health survives growing up poor, they face higher risks of blood pressure problems and other physical health problems. Americans are not lazy. Nobody wants to be poor. Okay? Did you know that the largest recipient of food stamp beneficiaries are often white children? I mention that because so often the picture is painted that it's nothing but African Americans. Okay? The racists, like the Tea Parties, nothing but these gosh darn N-words on that. Yeah, fine. Really? No. The truth of the matter is the largest recipient of food stamp beneficiaries are white children. Hey, ladies and gentlemen, I'm white. Did you know that the overwhelming majority of working, able-bodied food stamp recipients work either full or part-time? Yeah, they're not lazy. And that disabled and senior citizens make up a large percentage of food stamp beneficiaries, and that 76% of SNAP benefits go towards households with children. The majority of food stamp beneficiaries that use the program for just 6 months, and that the rate of fraud to the program is less than 1%. You really have to think of the kids. Okay? But the idea that nothing but lazy people, that they say lazy black people who don't want to work, who are just looking for a handout, they ignore all the facts that we know about welfare. And nobody ignores them more than Don Yelton. So, who is Don Yelton? A Republican precinct official in North Carolina had to resign after he went on The Daily Show and criticized, quote-unquote, lazy black people that wants the government to give them everything. Now, to be fair to him, he also mentioned lazy Democrats and lazy college students, but not before he also threw in lazy blacks. I think he was trying to qualify it and thought he could just throw blacks in and didn't think that part would be singled out, okay? And he also said, he was asked by the interviewer, "Are you a racist?" And he said nothing. And then he says, "I've been called a bigot before." And he says, "When I was a young man, you didn't call a black. You called him a Negro." He also said that the state's voter ID law is going to kick Democrats in the butt, essentially admitting this really has nothing to do with voter ID. This has everything to do with defeating the Democrats. And, of course, the Republican Party in that state and the RNC and all the rest, they said, no, this is not what we think. He's not representative of us. Don Yelton has since been interviewed by local news channels over in his state, and he has decided to stick with, yeah, he stands by all his statements, and the Democrats just can't handle the truth. This kind of poisonous thinking really needs to go by the wayside, and for the most part it is. As we've discussed, with the poll numbers, less and less people are happy with the Republican Party. If the election were held today, they would lose damn near every election in the country. Almost nobody is behind the Tea Party anymore, which is just fabulous. Sorry, but it is. Okay? And this kind of thinking is going by the wayside. I want to make my DM this week someone else who is also pushing very, very poisonous thinking. And that gentleman's name, and I use the term loosely, his name is Dave Daubenmire. Coach Dave Daubenmire uploaded a new rant to the internet this week, this time about bullying. However, make no mistake, Daubenmire, excuse me, I'm saying his name wrong. I'm such a jerk. Daubenmire isn't against bullying. In fact, he believes that it is a part of life, quote unquote. Instead, he goes on a rant about how America is sissifying its youth by training some of the softest children in the history of the world, quote unquote. Softest children in the history of the world. But he doesn't stop there. What seems to be at the core of Daubenmire's frustration surrounding the initiative to combat bullying is that the focus is to get people to not criticize, poke fun, or make fun of homosexuals. You heard that right. He goes, who the hell are you to stop me from making fun of homosexuals? As Right-Wing Watch first reported, Daubenmire fumed, and when Christians can no longer say something that their conscience tells them to say, then what we see, then we see that a majority began to bully the minority. So now we're beginning to see Christians and Christian idea and Christian values become the most bullied of all time. Okay, so he says, He says, this is my Christian ideal that allows me to be a bully, okay? So often it's said, I should be able to hate Christians, or excuse me, they say I should be able to hate gays, or they say I should be able to, hate abortions, or whatever. I've read the Bible, and I don't remember Christ saying a lot about gays, or abortions, or the voting rights of women, which is wildly under attack in Texas right now. But I do remember Jesus saying an awful lot about feeding the poor, healing the sick, the things that are under vicious attack right now in the Republican Party platform. And by and large, the Tea Party platform. Okay, I would like to... now, I want to get into a little bit of good news, okay? I try to bring you some good news, okay? And this is a good one right here because this comes to us from addictinginfo.org, and it's about Chris Hayes. Ben Domenech was on Chris Hayes' talk show last week and was just getting really annoyed with all of the same old Republican talking points just being thrown at him on his own show. And so Chris had the courage to just stand up and say, and I quote, "These hucksters tell you that things are false. They lie to you. Ted Cruz lies to you. Heritage Action lies to you. Everybody lies to you. There's a whole cottage industry before the election to tell you that you're winning the election when you're losing. They tell you your ideas are popular when they are not. They tell you your party is winning when it is not. They tell you the president is losing and that he looks terrible because people are storming the World War II memorial. At what point do grassroots conservatives stop allowing their leadership to lie to them?" And then Daubenmire responded like this. "Well, I think you have to keep in mind that the leadership lies to themselves as well." Let me underline that. As well. I think that you have to keep in mind that the leadership lies to themselves as well. He goes on. They lie to themselves about their ability to control the situation. They lie to themselves about the ability to offer an alternative approach from the Senate side, that they could take it up with the House at the get-go. I think especially you're seeing a lot of people who are lying to each other about the nature of policies and the nature of political strategy that they are employing. This was a guy who started the interview by just lobbing talking points at Chris Hayes and then said, yeah, I think they're this lie, that lie, that lie. Yeah, they're lying. Did he just say that their whole party is a foundation of lies? I want to get into the president for a moment. December 14th of this year will be 1 year since Sandy Hook happened. And there's a book coming out by Joshua DuBois called The Daily Readings That Inspired President Obama. I've got a small excerpt from the upcoming book, and I read this, and I've edited it a little bit, but it's an excerpt directly from the book, and it really touched me because it's one of those things you don't hear a lot about. Okay, the conservatives are screaming their guts out about how he's a terrible person and all the rest, and hates America and wants us all dead and blah 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 blah. So, the Sandy Hook shooting was on December 14th, 2012. This is Joshua DuBois talking. The following Saturday, I awoke only to receive the word that the president would like me to accompany him to Newtown. He wanted to meet with the families of victims and then offer words of comfort to the country at an interfaith memorial service. I left early to help the advance team, who are the hardworking folks who handle the logistics for every event, set things up, and all the rest. When I arrived at the local high school where the meetings and memorial service would take place, we prepared 7 or 8 classrooms for families of the slain children and teachers. 2 or 3 families to a classroom, placing water and tissues and snacks in each one. Honestly, we didn't know how to prepare. This was the best that we could think of, though. The families came in, gathered together room by room. Many struggled to offer a weak smile when we whispered, "The president will be here soon." A few were visibly angry, so understandable that it barely needs to be said, and were looking for someone, anyone to blame. The families, though, mostly sat in silence. I went downstairs to greet President Obama when he arrived, and I provided an overview of the situation. 2 families per classroom. The first is, and their child was. The second is, and their child was, and on and on. The president took a deep breath and steeled himself and went into the classroom, and what happened next, I will never forget. Person after person received an engulfing hug from our commander-in-chief. He'd say, "Tell me about your son. Tell me about your daughter." And then hold pictures of the lost beloved as their parents described favorite foods, television shows, and the sound of their laughter. For the younger siblings of those who had passed away, many of them 2, 3, or 4 years old, too young to understand it all, the president would grab them, toss them up in the air, laughing, and then hand them a box of White House M&Ms, which were always kept close at hand. In each room I saw his eyes water, but he did not break. And the entire scene would repeat for hours, over and over again, through well over 100 relatives of the fallen, each one equally broken, wrecked by the loss. After each classroom, we would go back into those fluorescent hallways and walk through the names of the coming families. And the president would dive back in like a soldier returning to a tour of duty in a worthy but wearing war. We spent what felt like a lifetime in those classrooms, and every single person received the same tender treatment, the same hugs, the same looks directly into their eyes, the same sincere offer of support and prayer. And the funny thing is, President Obama has never spoken about these meetings. Yes, he addressed the shooting in Newtown and gun violence in general in a subsequent speech, but he did not speak of those private gatherings. In fact, he was nearly silent on Air Force One as we rode back to Washington. That's excerpted from the President's devotional, The Daily Readings That Inspired President Obama. And it's one of those stories that you don't hear about. And quite honestly, it's one of those things that I'm fairly certain the NRA would rather you did not hear about. but you heard it here. Because with all of the talking about how great guns are and all of this, we need guns to protect ourselves, I don't, and I've made this point before, I don't see a whole lot of protection going on. What I do see, though, is an awful lot of slaughter. Did you know that it is against the law, per the NRA, for the government to keep stats on this kind of thing? There's a lot of news organizations that keep stats on how many kids are killed in school shootings and all the rest. But the NRA got a bill passed where it makes it illegal for the federal government to keep track of these things. Why? I think the answer is obvious. Because it makes guns look bad. Time for science. I've got a couple of science stories I really want to get to. There's some good news, there's some great news, and then there's some and then my final thought, which tonight will be about the language that we use. High blood sugar may increase the risk of cognitive decline. We were talking about children earlier. Yesterday was Halloween, and we all ate a ton of sugar, and that's fine, but we want to make sure we don't do it all the time. And part of the problem that we have is there's sugar in so many things that wouldn't normally have sugar because sugar is added. And I think that is done in a lot of those foods because, well, quite honestly, sugar is addictive. So, from ScienceWorldReport.com, a recent study shows that those with high levels of glucose in their blood may be at increased risk for memory problems. According to the study, German researchers assessed 140 healthy adults ranging from 50 to 80 years of age that carried no history of diabetes or pre-diabetes condition as well as no genetic predisposition to the problem. Lead study author Agnes Floel, MD, of Charity University Medicine in Berlin, and colleagues worked to solve a puzzle through a variety of tests that measured blood levels and brain waves. Brain scans showed that participants of the study with higher blood sugar also had smaller volumes in their hippocampus, which is the part of the brain that's linked to memory. Experts believe that lowering blood sugar to a normal range could help with these cognitive issues and the possible prevention of further memory decline as we age. The present findings might lead to a better understanding of the mechanisms underlying the effect of chronically elevated glucose brain function and structure and the interaction between these factors, which they wrote. They also added that certain lifestyle strategies could help in achieving the strict glucose control that can harm cognitive functioning. Get that sugar down. If you want to read more on this, you can go over to, the journal Neurology. There's an extensive study on this. I just kind of want to give you a brief overview of it. Okay. Drug stops brain degeneration like that's seen in Alzheimer's. Now, this is good news on Alzheimer's. I know it doesn't seem like there can be such a thing because it's been rampant for so long, but here it is. Scientists in Britain say they've discovered a drug that appears to stop the degeneration of brain cells in mice, a breakthrough that could eventually lead to a treatment of Alzheimer's disease, Parkinson's disease, and other degenerative brain elements in humans. We all know what Alzheimer's is, okay? But it's characterized by a degeneration of brain cells and function to the point people lose their ability to complete everyday tasks. There's no good treatment to stop this neurodegeneration on the market. Quote, I can see why preventing this process should only be restricted to mice, research team leader Professor Giovanni Molucci, a professor of cell physiology and pharmacology at the University of Leicester in UK, told The Independent. I think this probably will translate into other mammalian brains. A hallmark of degenerative brain diseases are buildups of proteins in the brain which form tangles that lead to the destruction of brain cells. According to the study's authors, the brain reacts to the formation of these tangles by protectively releasing a different protein that shuts off all protein formation, which is what's called an unfolded protein response, or UPR. Eventually, that protein switch should turn back on since the brain needs other proteins to function. But people with advanced Alzheimer's have had so much protein buildup that the switch remains off. While this stops more misfolded and tangled proteins from being made, it also stops production of other important proteins that are essential for brain cell survival. That causes brain cells to die, and it also causes the disease to progress. Researchers sought to block this UPR pathway that contributes to the disease by giving mice with a brain disease called prion disease a drug that targets a compound called PERK, P-E-R-K, a major mediator in the brain protein pathway. In the study, mice who did not receive the drug showed symptoms of prion disease, while the mice treated with the drug did not show symptoms. They were absolutely fine. It was extraordinary, Malucci told the BBC. What's really exciting is a compound has completely prevented the neurodegeneration. That's a first. The study was published in Science Translational Medicine. If you would like to go look up the full, once again, I give you the good, I give you the overview. Hey, it's only a 1 hour show, okay? I ran a half marathon about 2 weeks ago, 13.1 miles, one of the most fun, but also one of the most challenging things I've ever done in my life. I have not gotten sick since I became an avid runner about 20 months ago. I've not gotten sick at all. And there is some science behind that. This comes from sciencemag.org. Okay, and it's about how exercise beefs up the brain. We're kind of sticking with the brain here. If you notice, there's a bit of a theme running through here. While our muscles pump iron, our cells pump out something else, molecules that help maintain a healthy brain. But scientists have struggled to account for the well-known mental benefits of exercise, from counteracting depression to aging and fighting Alzheimer's and Parkinson's disease. But now a research team may have finally found a molecular link between a workout and a healthy brain. Follow me here. We're going to get real deep in the woods, okay? Much exercise research focuses on the parts of the body that do heavy lifting. Muscle cells ramp up production of a protein called FNDC5 during a workout. A fragment of this protein, known as irisin, gets lopped off and released in the bloodstream, where it drives the information of brown fat cells, thought to protect against diseases such as diabetes and obesity. Okay? White fat cells are traditionally the villains. While studying the effects of FNDC5 in muscles, cellular biologist Bruce Spiegelman of Harvard Medical Center in Boston happened upon some startling results. Mice that did not produce a so-called coactivator of FNDC5 production, known as PGC1A, were hyperactive and had tiny holes in certain parts of their brain. Other studies showed that FNDC5 and PGC1A are present in the brain, not just in the muscles, and that both may play a role in development of neurons. Spiegelman and his colleagues suspected that FNDC5 was responsible for exercise-induced benefits to the brain, in particular in increased levels of a crucial protein called brain-derived neuropathic factor. That's the BDNF. Okay, we now know what leads to exercise helping the brain. We've already know how it helps the muscles and the respiratory and the circulatory system. Okay. So to sort out that mechanism, Spiegel and his colleagues performed a series of experiments in living mice and cultured mouse brain cells. First, they put mice on a 30-day endurance training program. They didn't have to coerce their subjects because running is a natural part of a mouse's foraging behavior. It's harder to get them to lift weights, Spiegelman says. The mice with access to a running wheel ran the equivalent of a 5K every night. So, and of course, they found much better results in the brains of those animals. So that was a fabulous one. You can find more on this study over at sciencemag.org. Now, we're going to get into language, okay? Every word members of Congress say on the floor of the House or Senate is documented in congressional record. The Sunlight Foundation took the entire congressional record dating back to the 1990s and plugged it into a searchable database. Lee Drutman, a political scientist at Sunlight, took all those speeches and ran them through an algorithm to determine the grade level of congressional discourse. We just kind of did it for fun, but I was kind of shocked when I plotted the data and saw that, oh my goodness, there's been a real drop-off in just the last several years. In 2005, Congress spoke at an 11.5 grade level on the Fleisch-Kincaid scale. Now it's 10.6. In other words, Congress has dropped from talking like juniors to talking like sophomores. Okay? Couple of guys here. Georgia Republican Rob Woodall registers the second lowest grade level at 8.01. He averages 5 sentences with about 7.5 words per sentence. I quote, "My mother will probably be embarrassed to hear this news," Woodall says, "but I'm glad to know that I'm not obfuscating the challenges with words that are too complicated." You're right. That's great. You're a Republican. Woodall is part of a large freshman class that came into Congress in 2010, many of them backed by the Tea Party movement. Sunlight's Drutman says that this infusion of new members looks to be a part of the reason for the overall grade level decline. Okay, one of the lowest was South Carolina Republican Mick Mulvaney. He rated the lowest at 7.94. By the way, Mulvaney graduated with honors from Georgetown and earned a law degree from the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, and his father was a high school grammar teacher. This was really, really surprising to me. This is called The Words We Use Every Day by Zoe Triska over at HuffPo. And there are so many things in our language that we use every day that we don't think about, and I'm guilty of the same, but I have more recently, in the last year or two, really been focusing on what I call slogan language, which is where you hear a lot of people say kind of the same, I mean, they're always throwing those really common slang, really common phrases into their everyday language, okay? Here are some things that you should stop saying. Gyp. Like you got gypped out of something, right? The word gyp, which now means to cheat or swindle, is essentially a condensing of the word gypsies, who throughout history have been stereotyped as a group that cheats or swindles people. Before the contemporary definition of gypsy, which essentially was just a nomadic person, gypsy was a slur used to refer to Eastern European Romanis. Okay. Ghetto. Using ghetto as an adjective to mean low class has obvious racist origins. The noun ghetto originated as an area in Venice, Italy. It was the place where Jewish people lived. This also has racial implications, but of a different sort than the adjective ghetto. Technically, the current definition of ghetto is the part of the city where members of a particular group or race live, usually in poor conditions. Whether intended or not, the user is essentially implying that minorities are low class. Now, here's one that doesn't get used a lot, but it still gets used. Chinese whispers. This phrase, meaning inaccurately transmitted gossip, is often used in the UK more than the US. It actually originated as Russian scandal or Russian gossip, but was later changed for reasons that are unclear. It is supposed that the origin of this phrase has something to do with the Chinese language being difficult to understand. Regardless, I like to call it a game of telephone. Say that instead. Once something goes through enough people, I was in drama, if you ever play the game of telephone, one person whispers the same thing into a person's ear, and then they turn and they whisper, and after going through so many people, the message changes. Well, some people call those Chinese whispers, and they shouldn't, but that's another thing that should drop from our language, okay? Call it the game of telephone. It's much less racist. Irish goodbye. An Irish goodbye is another way of saying a hasty exit without stopping to formally say goodbye to anyone. It can also be known as a French exit, or probably just insert any country that your country has a problem with exit. In France, it's called filer et l'anglais, to leave the English way. Okay, obviously there's this thing between the English and the French. At any rate, you might want to think before you use that phrase that stereotypes an entire nationality of people as being rude. Conservatives, you will still continue to rail against the French. I'm well aware of this. Sold down the river. This gets used a lot, and this needs to go away. Sold down the river, the phrase meaning betrayed or cheated, originated in the Mississippi River region during the American slave trade. Troublesome slaves would be literally sold down the river to southern Mississippi, where the plantation conditions were much harsher. Yeah, that one gets used a lot, and it's wildly racist. Peanut galleries, which now means a source for hecklers, usually used in a joking manner, were the upper balconies that African American people sat in segregated theaters. They were also known by even more derogatory names, which will not be shared here. Uppity. The word uppity, a word beloved by conservative news pundits, originated as a word used by Southerners in reference to African Americans that they deemed didn't know their place in society. Uppity. This one surprised me. Hip-hop hooray. This comes from the German hep hep, which was originally a shepherd's herding cry, so the origin itself was not initially racially charged. However, during the Holocaust, German citizens began to use it as a rallying cry while hunting for Jewish people in the ghettos. Its anti-Semitic usage even dates back to the 1819 riots, which were also called the Hep Hep riots. Calling a spade a spade. Initially, it wasn't racist, but eventually it became a racist term after the 1928 book Home to Harlem, in which Wolfgang Meeder notes that the word spade will give deep offense if used by non-blacks. Here's one that's in contention. Rule of thumb. I eventually learned about this one, and I was told that this was meant, in the time where it was okay to beat your wife, you just couldn't use a stick thicker than your thumb. I couldn't find anything to corroborate that information, so let's just say this. Quit using rule of thumb. It's offensive no matter what it means, because we don't know where it comes from. And if it does have to do with domestic violence, you might want to can it, okay? Dog in this fight. I've used this phrase a lot, and I have dropped it, saying, I do not have a dog in this fight. Whereas, if I'm watching a football game with people, and they say, who are you rooting for? Hey, if the Hawks aren't playing, I say, I don't have a dog in this fight. Obviously, this refers to dog fighting, which nobody likes Michael Vick anymore, and they were absolutely horrified after they found out what he did. Dog in this fight. I have dropped using that phrase. Breaking President Obama. Conservatives don't use this as much anymore, but there was a time where this was terribly popular, and even senators have said it. Back when slaves were trying to become free, trying to break away from their slave masters, there used to be a thing called slave breakers. And slave breakers would come to your house and break down those uppity slaves and put them in what was believed at that time to be their respective place in society. Yeah, they were called slave breakers. And more than one U.S. senator or congressman from the Deep South, Republican or Tea Partier, has used the phrase, we need to break President Obama. Excuse me, ladies and gentlemen, this is dog whistle language. Have you not noticed that the president is black? You might want to quit using that phrase. But people ignorant of history, or people who just don't know, I don't want to call everyone ignorant that doesn't know, because I didn't know a lot of these things either. But think about it, ladies and gentlemen. It is very important to think about the language we use. We're judged by the language we use, and when we tend to use phrases and words that we hear being commonly used, we don't really necessarily know where they come from. We make them a part of our everyday lexicon, and we could be saying something terribly racist or sexist. Just this. Think about some of the phrases that you use every day. Try looking those phrases up. You can find all kinds of information on the internet. Don't just go to one site. Go to many sites. Find out exactly what you're saying before you use those same slogans over and over again to make sure that you're not using racist, sexist, or homophobic language. You're going to be happier for it. And you're going to feel better that you know exactly what you're saying before you open your yap. The language we use, ladies and gentlemen, is very important, and I'm a language buff. I'm no linguistic, but I'm getting bigger on this stuff every day, ladies and gentlemen. I want to thank you for joining me for another fiery episode of The Fire You Can't Put Out, episode 41. Join me next week for episode 42, where, well, I've been stacking up news stories already for next week. Very, very excited to get there. Remember, we are the fire we can't put out, and we will prevail. Good night, everybody. Or a good day, whatever. See ya.